On an ordinary morning in 1971, four young children walked into their school and were never seen again. What followed became one of the darkest, most disturbing mysteries in American history. The truth was buried for decades, until something was discovered that changed everything. Watch till the end, and don't forget to subscribe if you think you're ready to uncover the chilling truth behind Hollow Creek. On the morning of Monday, October 11th, 1971, the wind that cut across the quiet town of Hollow Creek, Pennsylvania, carried with it a strange tension, like a hum just beneath the earth's skin. It was the kind of day that started ordinary but never should have. The sun was late to rise through a veil of fog, casting a pale glow that dulled the colors of the changing autumn leaves. At 7:52 a.m., the small yellow school bus number 42B rolled down Willow Lane and made its usual stop in front of the red brick duplex where the Donahue twins, Lila and Jasper, waited hand in hand. 4 years old, quiet, and small for their age, they climbed the steps with barely a sound and slid into the second row without a word. 2 blocks down, at 7:57 a.m., the bus picked up Emily Grant, 5 years old, wearing a sky blue coat 2 sizes too big and dragging a worn backpack stitched with daisies. Her mother, Helen, stood on the porch clutching a mug of black coffee. Watching her daughter wave with such force, it looked like her arm would snap. She would replay that moment 1,000 times over in the years that followed. How the fog seemed thicker around Emily than anywhere else. How the bus tires skidded slightly on the damp asphalt. How her daughter's face disappeared behind that steel door. At 8:03 a.m., the last stop was made on Clover Avenue, where Thomas Berkeley, 5 years old and the tallest of the 4, boarded the bus alone. His mother had left for a nursing shift, and his father, still inside the house nursing a hangover, hadn't noticed his son slip out the door early. Thomas climbed in the back seat, threw his backpack beside him, and stared out the window like he was already somewhere else. The ride to Hollow Creek Primary was only 11 minutes long. The bus pulled into the school's horseshoe-shaped drop-off lane at 8:14 a.m. The driver, Roy Heller, 56 years old, reported seeing all 4 children disembark along with the rest. He watched them step onto the sidewalk and head toward the front entrance, laughing, tugging jackets, stumbling like puppies. He waved at one of the teachers on bus duty and drove off. That was the last time anyone saw them. The attendance roster showed Jasper, Lila, Emily, and Thomas as present by 8:30 a.m., though that would later be debated. No teachers recalled seeing them in their homerooms. None of the playground aides remembered them at recess. No one remembered them in the lunch line. And yet, no one noticed they were missing. In a school of 130 students, such an oversight should have been impossible. But Hollow Creek was the kind of town where bad things didn't happen. Not to its children. Not on school grounds. Not on a Monday. It wasn't until 3:01 p.m., when the bell rang and the final bus pulled away, that the first alarm was raised. Helen Grant waited on her porch again. Same spot, same coffee mug, eyes scanning every yellow bus that passed. But Emily never got off. The Donahue twins' mother, Maggie, stood at the curb, clutching their lunchboxes with growing confusion. She asked the bus driver, who blinked at her and said, "They weren't on my route this afternoon." He assumed they had been picked up early. George Berkeley, Thomas's father, only realized something was wrong when a police cruiser pulled up in front of his house just after 6 p.m. Panic set in like a storm surge. First confusion, then rising dread, then screaming winds of disbelief. Calls were made. Teachers were interviewed. Neighbors questioned. At 6:42 p.m., Principal Everett called the Hollow Creek Police Department. By 7:10, officers were inside the school combing through hallways, checking bathrooms, storage closets, utility rooms. Every door was opened, every locker yanked, every drawer pulled. They found nothing. The parents arrived in waves, Maggie and Paul Donahue together, Helen Grant shaking and hollow-eyed, George Berkeley drunk and growing belligerent by the second. Their voices echoed off the tiled walls in shrill pleas and accusations. Someone had to know something. For children don't just vanish. Not from a school. Not in broad daylight. Not all at once. By 9:30 p.m., the search expanded. Flashlights flickered in the woods behind the school. Police dogs were brought in from Pittsburgh. Volunteers combed through nearby fields, culverts, and abandoned barns. They checked under manhole covers, dragged the creek. Helicopters scanned with infrared sensors, though fog rendered visibility useless. Still nothing. The next morning, the newspapers ran headlines that would become burned into Hollow Creek's bones. For children missing from school, no trace found. Theories exploded. Kidnapping, accidental death, a rogue janitor, a bus driver gone mad. Police interrogated Roy Heller for 11 straight hours. He passed a polygraph. So did all the staff. No one had a record. No one had motive. No one had opportunity. There were no ransom notes. No suspicious strangers reported. The security cameras installed at the school, new at the time, weren't functioning. A voltage short. The tape stopped at 8:12 a.m. and never resumed. The town fell into hysteria. Reporters swarmed. FBI agents set up a field station in the school gymnasium. Psychics came from other states. Parents pulled their kids from class. Trust eroded like a cliff face. Hollow Creek, once so proud of its low crime rate and American innocence, became a name whispered like a curse. Helen Grant lost her voice for nearly a week. Maggie Donahue tore out half the carpet in her living room looking for a clue no one could explain. George Berkeley, already prone to violence, accused his ex-wife of selling their son and spent 3 months in county jail after assaulting a detective. Paul Donahue never cried once. He just stood in the doorway every night, waiting for his kids to walk up the path. They never did. In the first year, over 200 tips were investigated, everyone a dead end. The second year brought fewer phone calls, less search funding. Newspapers dropped the case from the front page. The world moved on. The parents didn't. Maggie and Paul separated in 1973. Helen moved to Harrisburg and started smoking. George died in a drunk driving accident in 1976. By 1980, most of the original investigating officers had retired or transferred. The new ones treated the case like a ghost, a cold file, a rumor. Some didn't even believe the children had made it to school that day. But there were moments, brief and horrifying, where the pain resurfaced like blood through a bandage. In 1982, a local boy swore he saw Emily Grant at a truck stop in Ohio. Police followed the lead. It turned out to be a girl with a similar coat. In 1986, an anonymous letter arrived at the sheriff's office claiming the children had been buried beneath the gym floor. It was excavated. Nothing was found. The story faded. No bodies, no witnesses, no answers. Until October 1991, 20 years to the day. That morning, Hollow Creek woke up to a new kind of fog, one thicker than memory. At 7:38 a.m., just as the town was beginning its Monday routine, a maintenance worker named Harold Klein, while doing routine renovations in the school's disused subbasement, uncovered something beneath a rusted drain panel. It wasn't a body, not at first. It was a small leather shoe, weathered, brittle, and soaked in old blood. Harold dropped it like it had burned him. He called his supervisor. Police were notified. By noon, the school was cordoned off. By nightfall, the story was on the national news. What the excavation revealed underneath that concrete panel changed everything. Because the shoe wasn't alone. It was resting on a metal trapdoor, long welded shut from beneath, completely sealed with industrial-grade bolts and paint. No one on staff even knew the panel existed. It wasn't on any blueprints. But once the welds were broken and the lid opened, the truth that had evaded a generation began to pour out in choking, terrible pieces. The first officer to descend into the space beneath the trapdoor was Detective Neil Carrington, a seasoned investigator brought back from retirement the moment the discovery made headlines. It had been his case once, a ghost that haunted him more than the 3 divorces and his own daughter's overdose. When the call came in that morning, he didn't hesitate. He was already dressed and waiting, as though he had known all along that someone, was about to speak. The subchamber was no more than 6 feet deep. Cold, narrow, damp, with rusted steel walls that didn't match the rest of the building structure. A rectangular room, no larger than a janitor's closet, sealed in silence for 2 decades. It smelled of mildew, rot, and old metal, but beneath it all, there was something fouler, something human. The shoe was only the beginning. Lying in the corner of that steel room, partially mummified and wrapped in what looked like an old checkered picnic blanket, were the remains of 2 children. Tiny, curled, almost fetal. The first forensic scan confirmed what the parents of Hollow Creek feared and prayed against in equal measure. Dental records verified them as Lila and Jasper Donahue. Their mother, Maggie, was brought in to identify personal items found near the remains: a yellow crayon with a bite mark, a pink plastic bracelet, a tiny hair clip with a plastic flower. She collapsed before she could speak. And yet, as horrifying as it was, the discovery raised more questions than it answered. Because Emily Grant and Thomas Berkeley were not there. Their bodies were not found in the chamber. No trace of them. Only the Donahue twins. Only 2. How had 4 children vanished together? Only for 2 to be found in an underground tomb beneath the very school they were taken from. Where were the others? And then came the second horror. As forensics worked through the room, analyzing every inch, every particle of dust, a team uncovered something strange beneath the baseboard. A sliding panel, concealed behind a layer of thin, rusted steel. Inside the compartment was a leather-bound notebook, water-damaged, fragile, but intact enough to reveal something no one was prepared to read. The pages were filled with handwritten confessions, diagrams, schedules, even a set of photographs, black and white Polaroids, aged and curling at the edges. One photograph showed Lila, asleep or unconscious, in a folding chair. Another showed Jasper's small hand pressed against what appeared to be glass. The last one was worst of all, a blurry image of 4 children standing in a dark corridor that didn't match any part of the school. Their faces pale, confused. Behind them, a man's hand. The journal bore no name, but the writing style, the vocabulary, the careful planning, hinted at someone educated, someone meticulous, someone who knew the school inside and out. It didn't take long before names surfaced. Victor Ambrose, the school's former science teacher and part-time maintenance assistant. Victor had worked at Hollow Creek Primary from 1964 to 1972. He left suddenly, just weeks after the children vanished, claiming a family emergency and relocating to rural Virginia. At the time, he had no criminal record, no reports of misconduct, no apparent link to the disappearances, aside from one chilling detail. Victor Ambrose had personally overseen the construction of the sub-basement in 1970. At the time, it had been billed as structural reinforcement, a basement expansion to make space for new piping and storage. But the new floor plan, the one Victor submitted, never included the trapdoor room. The blueprints had been doctored. Police visited his last known address. He was gone. Victor had died in 1983, reportedly in a car accident near Roanoke. But the coroner's report, hastily written and missing photos, gave little comfort. There was no family, no burial site. Just a small, unmarked envelope from a cheap funeral home that claimed his ashes had been scattered near a river. Helen Grant sat in her living room watching the news that night, numb. Her hand clutched a photograph of Emily at age 3, her first pigtails. She didn't speak, not even when the footage of the hidden room played on television. She just watched, unblinking. Paul Donahue refused to do any interviews. Maggie drank herself into unconsciousness twice that week. The town of Hollow Creek was drowning again, this time in answers that led only to more darkness. A week after the chamber discovery, another clue surfaced. During a secondary sweep of the basement infrastructure, crime scene analysts found a ventilation shaft leading away from the hidden room. Though rusted and nearly collapsed, it stretched nearly 30 feet beneath the building and ended just behind the old theater stage in what had once been a faculty storage room. That room had been sealed since 1974 due to asbestos concerns. Inside the room, officers found a narrow crawl space, a passage that had been covered with plywood and forgotten. And within that crawl space, they found blood. Human blood. Type B positive. A small handprint. too small to belong to any adult. Next to it, a stuffed toy rabbit missing its head. DNA testing, now more advanced in 1991, confirmed the blood belonged to Emily Grant. She had been there, alive, bleeding. No one knew for how long. The realization that the children may have still been alive after the initial search shattered everyone, especially the parents. It meant that Emily and Thomas could have been somewhere, locked, trapped, hidden, in a building crawling with officers and search dogs. They had been close. So close. Helen Grant became a shadow of herself. She went days without eating. She wandered the woods behind the school at night with a flashlight, whispering her daughter's name. Paul Donahue took to sleeping in his truck, parked at the edge of the schoolyard, staring at the building like it owed him something. The town, shaken once again, demanded answers. Investigations were reopened. Retired staff were re-interviewed. Former students came forward with stories, strange noises in the walls, rumors of ghost kids crying through vents, unexplained cold spots in certain classrooms. One girl recalled how, for months after the disappearance, her desk would rattle slightly every morning, as though something beneath the floor was trying to knock its way out. The FBI brought in ground-penetrating radar. They tore open the floorboards of the entire south wing of the school. Nothing definitive was found. But then the twist. Late one night in November 1991, a woman named Janice Laurel, who had been a second-grade teacher at the school in 1971, came forward with a sealed envelope she said had been left in her mailbox anonymously just 2 days prior. Inside was a photograph, grainy, damaged. It showed a boy, Thomas Berkeley, older, maybe 15, possibly 16, standing in what looked like a cellar or bunker, expression blank, holding a sign with a date written on it, February 17th, 1981. The message on the back was simple: still alive. Not for long. The photograph was sent for immediate analysis. Experts deemed it authentic. No tampering. No clear origin. The paper stock matched film sold in the late 70s. The handwriting on the sign was never matched. For the first time in 20 years, it was no longer just a mystery of death. It was something else. Something worse. Someone had kept them, raised them, or used them. And if Thomas had been alive in 1981, what about Emily? Where had they gone? And who had taken them? What exactly had Victor Ambrose built under Hollow Creek? The discovery of the photograph shifted everything. For the first time in 2 decades, the case moved from a haunting memory to a live investigation. The idea that Thomas Berkeley had survived, been kept, held, hidden, ignited a frenzy across the state. His face, older and sadder, but undeniably his, flashed across every news network. Parents watched with horror. The town held its breath. But more than fear, something else festered beneath the surface. Rage. Because someone, somewhere, had done this. And they had done it under the noses of the entire town. Within 72 hours of the photo's appearance, the FBI launched a new task force. Dozens of agents descended on Hollow Creek again. The school was officially shut down. Drones scanned the property. Soil samples were taken. Equipment that hadn't existed in 1971 now illuminated parts of the foundation no one knew were hollow. The school, it turned out, had more than one secret. In late November, investigators uncovered a secondary network of crawl spaces and sub-utility corridors running beneath the south and west wings of the school, tunnels that never appeared on blueprints. The passages were narrow, some barely wide enough for a child. Old insulation, ducts rerouted around the natural structure. Whoever had designed it had been deliberate. Within one of these tunnels, behind a slab of crumbling drywall, agents found what looked like an old steel locker. When pried open, it released a stink that made men vomit. Inside were scraps of clothing, children's drawings, and a stack of cassette tapes. The first tape was labeled Day 1 LJ. The voice that emerged when played was soft, clinical, male. Not Victor Ambrose's, at least not definitively, but chilling in its calmness. This is day 1 of adjustment. Subject LJ, age 4. Mild dehydration, responsive. Exhibits signs of anxiety and slight mutism. No parental contact established. Begin baseline protocol. The audio was followed by soft crying, then scratching, then silence. Other tapes followed. Day 2, Day 5, Day 19. One was labeled, Emily, Panic Episode. Another, Thomas, Failed Attempt. The FBI wouldn't release the full contents of the tapes, but enough leaked to paint a nightmarish picture. The children had been studied, manipulated, subjected to psychological conditioning. Someone had used them for reasons still unknown, possibly for research, possibly for sadism, possibly both. Helen Grant never heard the tapes. She refused. She said she'd rather remember her daughter's laughter than her screams. But Paul Donahue listened. All of them. Every second. He stopped sleeping after that. Then came December. The town was gripped in a deep frost. Bitter winds swept through Hollow Creek like knives. And just before Christmas, another letter arrived. This time it wasn't mailed. It was left on the principal's desk. The building had been sealed, guarded 24/7 by state police. No one saw who left it. No fingerprints. Just an envelope. Inside, a photograph. It was Emily. Not a 5, but maybe 17. She stood in front of a wooden wall, possibly a cabin or shelter, with long hair, a pale face, eyes sunken but alive. She was holding a chalkboard. On it, a message. Help him. I'm gone. The image devastated the investigation. It confirmed what none wanted to believe. That Emily had survived and died later. That Thomas was still alive. That someone was taunting them. The agents doubled down. New theories bloomed like rot in the dark. Victor Ambrose had help. Someone else had been part of it. Maybe even still alive, still nearby. Perhaps it hadn't been one monster, but a ring, a hidden collective, operating in the shadows of a quiet town. They called it the Hollow Project. There was no proof. Only signs, hints, terrors wrapped in dust. By January 1992, the investigation had crossed state lines. Virginia, West Virginia, Kentucky. Tiny cabins were raided. Old facilities combed through. A trailer deep in Allegheny Forest was found abandoned, but inside it were wall charts, tracking growth, behavior, trauma response. It was human experimentation, but all the subjects were children. Some were named. Most were not. The last page of one chart read, TB adapted fully. Transfer scheduled. Transfer to where? The deeper they dug, the more surreal it became. Because this wasn't just a crime. It was a system. And Hollow Creek was only the beginning. In early February, police made a breakthrough. A warehouse outside Roanoke, long dormant, caught fire after an anonymous tip led agents to investigate. Inside, amidst the blackened ruins, was a burned cot, several blood-stained restraints, and a wall marked in red. He still walks. Look west. There was surveillance footage of a shadowy figure leaving the scene minutes before the fire. He moved like a man with no weight. Ghost-like, but he was real. Weeks passed. Then, finally, a survivor. Not a child, but a woman, middle-aged, found wandering along a stretch of rural road near a bus depot in Ohio. She was incoherent, trembling, covered in scars, some fresh, some decades old. Her name was Evelyn Morell. She had once worked as a cleaning assistant at Hollow Creek Primary in 1971. She had vanished in 1972, presumed dead. No family had claimed her. Now, she was found 30 pounds underweight, with bruises in the shape of cuffs around her wrists and burns across her back. Her mind had been shattered by years of captivity. But after 2 days of medical treatment and a gentle approach, she uttered one clear name. Thomas. When asked where he was, she whispered, "The Hollow keeps them. Still underground. Not in Hollow Creek. But deeper. Much deeper." The press went into frenzy. The FBI refocused west. More agents. More searches. More silence. Helen Grant died of a stroke on March 3, 1992. She never got to know what happened to her daughter. Her obituary ran, with no mention of closure. Just the words she had repeated to herself over the years like a prayer and a curse. She's somewhere. She's somewhere. Maggie Donahue refused to speak to reporters. She moved away and changed her name. Paul stayed. He bought a small house near the ruins of the school, now condemned, and sat on the porch every night, a shotgun in his lap, as if waiting for evil to return through the woods. And then, in April 1992, something did return. Or rather, someone. At 3:14 a.m., a young man was found wandering the edge of the old school grounds. He was barefoot, dressed in clothes 30 years out of fashion. He was gaunt, eyes wide, blinking at the world like it was too bright, too fast, too much. He collapsed in the arms of a passing trooper. He was taken to Hollow Creek Medical under high security. Fingerprints were taken. DNA confirmed it. It was Thomas Berkeley, alive, aged 25. He had been missing for 20 years. When he woke, he couldn't speak at first, only whispered sounds. He was terrified of ceilings, of locked doors, of loud footsteps. He flinched at fluorescent lights. Nurses noted how he hoarded food, panicked at loud noises, and spoke to someone who wasn't there. For weeks, he gave no coherent answers, only fragments. She held my hand when they came. There was another place, not walls, tunnels. They fed us chalk, made us forget the years. And then, finally, the words that stopped every heart in the room. She didn't die. Emily. She was taken again. Thomas Berkeley sat beneath soft lighting in a secured medical unit, surrounded by quiet nurses and federal agents who no longer spoke in confident tones. His eyes rarely met anyone's. He flinched when a door clicked. He cried in his sleep, murmuring names no one recognized, except for one. Emily. In his first lucid interview, conducted carefully with a trauma therapist present, Thomas described a world that sounded more like fiction than memory. A place without time. A place underground. He spoke of long corridors carved from dirt and steel. Rooms with numbers instead of names. Lights that flickered but never fully went dark. Voices through vents. Hands that fed them but never showed faces. He remembered sleeping on concrete, being woken by alarms. Being drugged. Tested. Sometimes praised. Sometimes punished. The only warmth he knew came from Emily. She was the brave one, he whispered. She used to sing when they punished us. Made the walls feel farther away. He confirmed that Jasper and Lila had died within the first 2 months. Lila became sick. Jasper stopped eating. Thomas didn't remember where they were taken after. But Emily fought. She kept notes, scratched them into the walls. She remembered the days when I couldn't. When they took me away, she always found me. Always. Thomas described something the investigators had not anticipated: multiple facilities. Underground structures that didn't connect to each other, but were operated under a single cruel design. He didn't know where they were, only that sometimes they were moved in trucks, blindfolded, drugged, carried. Sometimes new children arrived. Sometimes they screamed and were never heard again. The Hollow, as they called it, wasn't a single place. It was a network, and Hollow Creek had been its first station. When asked about Victor Ambrose, Thomas recoiled. He didn't recognize the name, but when shown a photograph of Ambrose, his hand shook. I saw him. Once. At the mirror wall. He told them what to do. Called us phases. Like we were just experiments. Thomas couldn't recall how he escaped. Not clearly. There were flashes, fire, alarms, Emily's voice yelling his name. A tunnel. A hatch. Cold wind. Then waking up near the woods, confused and barefoot, with memories cracked like broken glass. He believed Emily had created the distraction, that she had found a way out, but stayed behind to make sure he got free. She had always protected him, and now she was gone. The FBI followed every thread Thomas gave. They searched across 4 states, tracked utility tunnels, storm drains, and old government buildings. They discovered one location deep in rural Ohio, hidden under a decommissioned military radar station. It matched Thomas's fragmented descriptions, but by the time they arrived, it was empty. Cleaned out, walls stripped, floors bleached, cameras removed. Only one thing remained, scratched into the back of a storage room wall, hidden behind shelving units. I hope you remember me. The press exploded again. Public outcry reached the highest levels. But the Hollow, if it had been a real organization, had vanished like mist. No names, no faces, no arrests. It was as though the darkness itself had gone underground again. Thomas was placed in protective care. No interviews were allowed. He was offered new identity, counseling, support. But he never fully returned to the world. He painted his windows black, refused phones. Sometimes he talked to shadows in the corners of the room. Always softly, always with fear. He stayed in Hollow Creek. In April of 1994, 2 years after his return, Thomas hung himself in his bedroom. No note, only a page torn from an old children's book tacked to the wall. On it, someone had written, "She's still down there." The funeral was small. Maggie Donahue didn't attend. Paul did, standing far in the back, silent, head lowered. A soft rain fell. Helen Grant's ashes were brought from Harrisburg to rest beside the site. The town kept its distance. No one wanted to believe, but some still heard things at night. Soft knocks beneath the old foundation. Whispers in the woods. The school was finally demolished in 1995. The ground beneath it was paved and turned into a memorial park with 4 small statues, each representing one of the children who vanished that day in 1971. Jasper and Lila were buried together under a plaque that read, "They were never forgotten." Emily's was left blank. Thomas's read only. He came home. The case of the Hollow Creek children remains one of the most disturbing unsolved child disappearances in American history. Despite thousands of pages of investigation, forensic evidence, photographs, and 2 surviving victims, no one was ever held accountable. To this day, no definitive proof of the Hollow Project exists. And yet, every year on October 11th, someone leaves a bouquet of daisies tied with a pink ribbon at the edge of the park. No one sees them come. No one claims responsibility. But on the underside of the ribbon, in tiny handwriting, is always the same message. Still watching. Still waiting. And beneath that, 3 letters etched so faint they're barely legible. E.g.,